Yo, 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 what's up, my AP Gov squad? Welcome back to AP Gov, Locked on AP Gov with Mr. H. And we're back at it here in week 8, guys. Can you believe it? It's week 8. One more week to go after this, our final exam, and then we get a 2-week break. So let's lock this in. We're still in Unit 2, the interactions among branches of government, but this is mini Unit 3, right? The judicial branch. And so we are finally moving into that next room of that house, that structure that our founding fathers and our framers built, right? The U.S. Constitution. We're moving into Article 3 from Article 2, the President Last Mini Unit. And we're moving into that next room. So what we've done here is we walked through the front door of this U.S. Constitution that is built off limited government, separation of powers, checks and balances, and republicanism, right? And old James Madison is the author of the Constitution, and he ripped and plagiarized these ideas straight from, remember, Unit 1, old Monty, Baron de Montesquieu from France, right? 1700s Enlightenment period, right? Spirit of the laws, he wrote, where government should be separated into 3 branches. And James Madison respectfully plagiarized that, right? And in our U.S. Constitution, there are some rooms that are created, the structure, right? And so today we're going into the next room, the judicial branches room, and we're going to check out its powers, its responsibilities, its how it functions, how it operates, and we're going to check out and see exactly what Article 3 was all about. So without further ado, let's dive into it, guys. Learning objectives for topic 2.8. Explain judicial review and how it checks the other branches. So let's get it. Yo, 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 welcome back to Locked On AP Gov, the only podcast that will have you spit in FRQ claims like it's light work. And yes, in May, guys, you guys, I believe in y'all. Keep doing the work. Keep putting in that work, fam, because it will pay off in May on the AP exam, specifically the FRQ section. That's where we can steal some points and get those 3s, 4s, and 5s. 90% pass rate is what we want, guys. And today we're unlocking the most powerful move in U.S. political system and the entire U.S. political system. It moves so sneaky, the founders, our framers, right, founding fathers, didn't even spell it out exactly, right? It's really not spelled out fully in Article 3. So today's focus, judicial review. Congress may write the laws, right? They may make them. They may have power of the purse. They may be able to declare a war, all their enumerated powers and then implied powers from the necessary and proper clause, right? And the president may enforce laws through signing statements, through his bureaucracy, right? His agencies and departments, his civil servants that work underneath him, 2.9 million of them. But the Supreme Court, they've got the power to look both branches dead in the eyes and say, nah, fam, that's unconstitutional, try again. Now, don't get this confused, right? Judicial review and the judicial branch, they cannot enforce things, right? They can just rule on things. The president has to enforce this stuff, and Congress can impeach the president for not following it, right, if the Supreme Court says so. But ultimately, judicial branch can't enforce it on the president. And if the president chooses not to follow a ruling of the Supreme Court, well, then Congress must check the president with impeachment charges or congressional oversight, right? And in a unified system like we have today, that might not really work the way it's intended. So we can talk about that more in class, but let's keep going. Okay, it's like the court's holding the ultimate Uno reverse card, flipping the game whenever they decide the other players are out of bounds. And in 2025, this year, guys, President Trump is back in office in the White House. The Oval Office right outside is the Rose Garden, right? First floor of the White House. And he has issued 200 plus executive orders. They are flying out like TikTok drafts. It's front page news, guys. This isn't something that doesn't matter. It matters directly to you and me. Man, lock it in. All right, so segment 1, Article 3, the bare bones blueprint, right? So let's start with the foundation. Article 3 of the U.S. Constitution, a foundational doc we got to know. Old James Madison, Unc Madison, wrote it for us, right? when the framers wrote the Constitution, they gave pages to Congress. In Federalist 51, James Madison said the most powerful, strongest branch, the first branch, is technically Congress. It has the most detail in it. Its structure. It is pages long, right? Article 1 is long. Article 2, well, that's the president, right? And it got a whole section. It had some meat to it, right? But the judiciary, the judicial branch, nah, fam, that's basically a paragraph and a pat on the head, right? It didn't get as much. And so here's what Article 3 actually does. It creates one Supreme Court, one Supreme Court. And no size is specifically given. Congress could essentially pass an amendment or an act of Congress to increase the number from 9 or to decrease, right? They have that power to check the Supreme Court, right? So Congress decided later how many justices there should be. And there are currently 9 justices that serve for life, right? So number 2, lets Congress establish lower federal courts. So you have the Supreme Court on top. And in class, we'll talk about this. Underneath it, you have the Court of Appeals. And then underneath that, you have your trial courts or your district courts. There's 93 district courts. There's 13 Court of Appeals. And then any other legislative court, such as the Armed Forces Court or Immigration Court or Tax Court, right? Constitutional courts, legislative courts. And it also gives judges lifetime tenures upon good behavior, right? So AKA life terms unless they do something impeachable. And number 4 outlines jurisdiction, right? Which courts will hear what, right? District or trial courts will hear original cases. They'll hear it first. Court of Appeals only review trial courts, district courts to see if there was anything done wrong, right? So they have appellant jurisdiction is what it's called. And then the Supreme Court has the top court in the land, has both original and appellate jurisdiction, and they do have the first look at something if they want to look at it, right? Okay, and so, but notice what's missing, right? The words judicial review not mentioned. No line saying the court can strike down acts of Congress or presidential orders or actions, right? Oh, and quick AP nugget here, guys. Don't forget the next article is next article is federalism, right? And our article here is supremacy clause that we need to lock in. And remember Article 6 here that says this Constitution is the supreme law of the land, right? So Article 1, legislative. Article 2, president. Article 3, judicial branch. Article 4, state rights, federalism, right? The sharing of power. Article 5, the amendment process, which is federalism as well. States have a say in it. Article 6 is supremacy clause of the federal government. The Constitution is supreme. And Article 7 is the ratification process. Don't forget those, okay? And it says the Constitution is supreme. Judicial review is how the court enforces that supremacy. All right, so let's go on to segment 2. Marbury v. Madison, the court's power grab. Flashback to 1803. 1803, Jefferson's just been elected president. John Adams on his way out, second president. Now we have our third one coming in, Thomas Jefferson. Tries to pack the courts with midnight judges. One of them, William Marbury, never gets his confirmation delivered. He sues the Secretary of State, one of the 3 original departments of the executive branch, the EOP, Executive Office of President, the executive branch. And the Secretary of State here was James Madison, right? Demanding the job. And here's where Chief Justice John Marshall at the time of the Supreme Court makes the ultimate boss move. Instead of just ruling that Marbury, for Marbury, he flips the whole case into a power play, right? Marshall writes, yes, Marbury deserves the job, but the law gives him the right to sue. The Judiciary Act of 1789 actually goes against the Constitution, so we can't enforce it. And boom. With that, the court declares or the court declares, it is emphatically the province and duty of the judicial department to say what the law is. Basically, what does it say? That's the birth of judicial review, the court's power to strike down laws and executive actions that violate the Constitution. Think of this as Article 3. Think of it as this, right? Article 3 with the plain game manual, right? Marshall found the hidden cheat code in the fine print and unlocked God mode, essentially. Suddenly, the court had the final say, the final word over Congress and the president here. And so why is Marbury versus Madison a required case? Why is it important? It's because it sets up judicial review. It gives the court that power. So always connect Article 3 and Federalist 78 when writing essays about the court's power. Always combine those two. All right, segment 3, Federalist 78, Hamilton, A. Ham saw it coming. Now let's rewind to Hamilton here. In Federalist 78, he calls the judiciary the least dangerous branch. Why? Because it has no sword, it has no purse, only judgment, right? It can't enforce these things. It can't block funding for things. It can only judge things. Those other two powers are the president's and Congress's, right? But Hamilton argues that judgment is everything. Judges need independence. An independent judiciary matters. It's so very important to prevent these judges, to keep these judges outside of public pressure and political pressure. Keep them independent from partisanship, right? Political party ties. And so in order to keep it independent, it will give us this. It'll guard the Constitution against bad laws from Congress. Bad laws, right? It protects minorities' rights from the majority tyranny, right? Protects the minorities' factions. Remember Fed 10, right? James Madison here. Fed 10 protects the minorities' factions, right? Minority factions from the majority faction. And it keeps balance of power in check. It keeps power in check here. So Hamilton warns that without the independent courts, free from public pressure and political pressure, that's why they serve for life, right? The Constitution becomes just parchment barriers, right? Petty words, or not petty, pretty words with no bite, right? No teeth, no massive teeth to actually do anything. And he also pushes for life tenures, which he calls permanency in office. So judges can resist public pressure, political pressure, which is what I've been talking about. And basically Hamilton says if referees get fired every time they make an unpopular call, nobody plays by the rules. We need refs who can't be bullied by the teams. Can't be bullied by the teams. And when Marshall, Chief Justice Marshall, back in 1803, he was the head judge of the Supreme Court at the time, dropped Marbury versus Madison, Hamilton's predictions became reality. Judicial review turned the least dangerous branch into the ref with the whistle, the only one who can eject a law or action from the game. All right, so let's keep going. Segment 4, judicial review and action. Okay, so what does this look like in practice? Judicial review, the court checking everyone else. Against Congress, U.S. v. Lopez. Court says Congress overreached on the Commerce Clause. Remember that required case when it tried to ban guns in schools. Against the president, U.S. v. Nixon. We've talked about it. Remember this. Lock it in. Courts forced Nixon to hand over Watergate tapes, proving no president is above the law. And then against the states, Brown v. Board. Lock it in. Know this one. Courts overturned Plessy versus Ferguson. Separate is not equal. You must integrate schools and public places. You must desegregate these locations, right? Separate is not equal. It's unconstitutional. Law must be colorblind. And it's not just old cases, guys. In 2025, it's still alive. Congress debates banning deep fake election ads. Courts may step in and ask, is that free speech under the First Amendment? Trump issues executive orders on immigration and surveillance of American citizens. Courts are reviewing whether they violate Fourth Amendment protections. State restricts women's reproductive rights. After Dobbs v. Jackson Women Clinic, the court case there, we need to know, right? Courts are deciding where the constitutional lines are, right? And don't forget about Obergefell versus Hodges in 2015, where the court legalized same-sex marriage, saying underneath the 14th Amendment, you cannot discriminate against somebody based on sexual preference, right? So that was a big one there. This is the Supreme Court flexing judicial review across centuries, refereeing Congress, the president, and the states when they step out of bounds. Super important. All right, segment 5, the controversy, too much power. And here's where the debate kicks in, right? Judicial review is powerful. Some say the most powerful power of the federal government, right? Some say too powerful. Critics argue judicial review isn't in the text. It's not black ink on white paper. We can't find it. It's basically judicial supremacy. 9 unelected justices, right? Striking down the work of elected officials? That sounds like oligarchy and robes to me. Sounds like elite democracy. Supporters argue, though, without judicial review, the Constitution is meaningless. Congress and the president could ignore it whenever they want it. Someone has to enforce the boundaries. This is where judicial activism and judicial restraint comes into play, and we need to lock these two types in. It's so important to understanding why justices vote the way they do on cases going forward. Activism means what? Court, and this is what Supreme Court justices today believe. There's about 3 to 4 activist judges on the Supreme Court currently. Think more liberal-minded here, right? But they shouldn't be political party ties. So activism, courts boldly strike down laws and precedents, previous court rulings, right, to protect rights. They are listening to modern society and they want to respond to current societal norms. Think Brown v. Board and think Obergefell versus Hodges. Brown v. Board said separate is not equal, must integrate, right? And Obergefell v. Hodges says you can marry, same-sex couples can marry, right? 14th Amendment's tied into both of these. And then restraint judges, more conservative leaning here, a little bit more Republican if you had to give it a party, but they should be separate of parties. The courts, and there's about 7 judges that act this way, courts defer to previous court rulings, precedents, and elected branches. Even if they disagree, guys, they're going to side more with the Constitution and the structures of the Constitution. They're not going to go take modern norms and societal norms into account. They're looking at the Constitution. What is allowed, not allowed, and what are the other branches doing here? The elected branches, and they're going to defer to previous court rulings. Think Plessy versus Ferguson, where they let that decision stand, and separate is equal back in the day, right? Even though it's wrong. And then Dobbs here, where they said, hey, whoa, Roe v. Wade needs to be struck down. Abortions isn't mentioned in the Constitution. And so in Dobbs v. Jackson Women Clinic in 2021-22, right, they said states need to decide this according to federalism, Article 4 of the Constitution, and the 10th Amendment states' rights. All right, so moving on to segment 6. Let's quickly run through the final boss storm circle. So let's check it out. Let's frame it Fortnite style. Congress equals players building forts. President, the one with all the loot and weapons. And Supreme Court, the storm circle. You can build, you can hoard weapons, but the storm decides the boundaries. Step outside and you get eliminated. That's judicial review. The storm shrinks the map, wiping out any law or executive action that doesn't fit inside the Constitution, right? The court may not have troops or cash, but it controls the boundary of the games. Bonus segment here, guys, courts versus Trump's tariffs this year. Let's bring it home. Trump's back in the White House, and he loves tariffs. Tariffs equal tax on imports like steel, aluminum, even iPhones, shoes, all sorts of stuff. He says they protect American workers, and it brings revenue into the federal government. And here's your AP Gov kicker here. Article 1 of the Constitution gives Congress the power over taxation and trade. Article 2 gives the president power to enforce the laws, not create them. So when Trump imposes tariffs on his own, lawsuits fly, companies argue. Does the president actually have this power, or is he stepping on Congress's turf? And so right now, currently, guys, in court, federal court, they've stepped in. They're reviewing it. Did Congress delegate the authority in laws like the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, which you don't know about, but just know Congress passed this a long time ago, and they're trying to see if it gives Trump the power to put out all these tariffs, right? Or is Trump freelancing, and is he kind of outside of what the presidential powers allow? Some tariffs are upheld. Others are potentially getting blocked right now. Courts use the non-delegation doctrine, guys. Congress can delegate powers or power, but most give intellectual principles to guide the executive, right? Or intelligible principles to guide the executive. So the message is clear, guys. Even the president can't play outside the lines. Judicial review is the whistle calling foul when the executive stretches too far. And we'll see how these federal courts rule on some of President Trump's tariffs going forward. In a restraint or conservative court, Trump's going to get his tariffs upheld. But in a activist or liberal court, which you do have a pretty good split here in our 93 district courts and our 13 court of appeals, right? A good distribution of liberal and conservative, or activist and restraint. But in a liberal or activist court, he will get blocked. We'll see what happens here going forward with not only these tariffs, but also other executive actions that he's done in his second term of office. All right, so that's not history, guys. That's happening right now in our courts today. So here's your AP exam ready takeaway, guys. Article 3 sets up the courts, but not judicial review. That's handled in 1803 in Marbury versus Madison, where it creates judicial review. That's a required case, got to lock it in. Federalist 78 argues that the judicial branch must stay independent. That's why we give judges life tenure in the federal government, in the federal branch, right, of the judicial branch. That way they can stay outside of political pressure. And judicial review lets the court strike down Congress, laws made that are unconstitutional, and the president, actions that are unconstitutional, and states when they violate the Constitution. The debate continues, though, guys. Is the court too powerful, or is it just powerful enough? Or are they not really doing the job that we've asked them to do through the Constitution? And in 2025, guys, judicial review is still flexing. It's still here, from Trump's tariffs to AI regulation to women's reproductive rights. These battles are still happening. An exam tip here, guys. If you get an argumentative FRQ about the court's role, pair Marbury versus Madison with 78, Fed 78, and that's your 1-2 punch combo. You can't go wrong with that. That's your recipe for success. And that's it for Locked On AP Gov today, guys. Next time, we're going to break down precedent, which is previous court rulings, and another Latin word here, which we'll get into our next podcast, where it says, let the decision stand is what it means. And basically, the court recycling TikTok sounds until someone remixes them. Until next time, remember, the courts may not have the sword or the purse, but with judicial review, it's still the final boss. Stay bold, stay curious, stay locked on AP Gov. Mr. H out. Peace.